One thing about this Bible journey that we will be going on and embarking this week, I do not know where I would have ended up during the last 3 years if it were not for a deep and personal study of the Bible through devotions and time with God. And during that time together, I would find verses that really stuck with me, and so I would save those verses, and on my devotional sheet, I would usually have them at the top. You see, I can tell you who won every Super Bowl from the first Super Bowl to up about 40 or so. And then I got married. So I can tell you scores, I can tell you dates, I can tell you MVPs. You ask me, hey, what verse does it say this? I'm like, you got me. So I need this type of reminder, is to write them down, to underline and keep them with me. And so I invite you this year to, when you spot a verse or verses that really cling to you, please hold on to that and add it to your daily study. So to get off on the right foot, I want to share with you 3 verses from today's readings that I think would be a good way to start. First off is from our first lesson in Isaiah. It's verse 6. I, the Lord, have called you for a good reason. I will grasp your hand and guard you. If you'll please repeat that with me. I, the Lord, have called you for a good reason. I will grasp your hand and guard you. And then over in our second lesson, it's the very first verse from today's reading. Peter said, I really am learning that God doesn't show partiality to one group of people over another. Please repeat with me. I really am learning that God doesn't show partiality to one group of people over another. And then finally from our gospel, it's the last verse. This is my son whom I dearly love. I find happiness in him. Please read with me. This is my son whom I dearly love. I find happiness in him. Please hold on to those verses for this week during your time with God. And remember, this is a journey. You take your time, you take your own pace, and we hope to see you throughout this year, starting on Wednesday. So, for the new people, most of you who've been here for a while know this already, but I have been a comic book fan my whole life. I started collecting Spider-Man when I was 3 years old. I couldn't read yet, but I loved the pictures. And I still remember how excited I was and how I felt this excitement when I was in line to go to see the Spider-Man movie that came out in the summer of 2001. The biggest debate I had with my friends that night was how long we would have to wait until we saw Peter Parker don the Spider-Man costume and go fight the bad guys. We knew it was probably going to be a while, but we Spider fans knew that in order for the movie to be successful and thus creating a franchise of movies, the first movie would have to explain the how and then the why. How did Spider-Man get his powers, and why does he use them for good? This form of storytelling is called an origin narrative, and we see it in just about every form of entertainment and literature, and we even see it in our Gospels. Today we begin a new season, as Deacon Susan said, called Epiphany, and Epiphany means revealed. So this is a season where we celebrate God revealed to us in Jesus Christ. And on this first Sunday of Epiphany, we celebrate the baptism of Jesus. Jesus' baptism has often been a point of debate among Christians. The debate surrounds the question, why? If baptism is supposed to mean the washing away of sins, then why did Jesus, who was without sin, need to be baptized? Maybe that question has bugged you as well. It has me. But this is where the origin narrative comes in. In the first 2 chapters of Matthew's Gospel, we read how any of this is possible. The Gospel of Matthew starts with how the family tree of Jesus is connected with the most beloved king in the history of the Jewish people, King David. Then we have the story of how the birth of Jesus was going to be special when an angel convinces Joseph to go through with the marriage to Mary, even though she was pregnant and was vulnerable to serious consequences. Then we have the story of how 3 wise men from the east found Jesus by the guidance of a star. Then we have the story of how Joseph, Mary, and Jesus survived the next few years by following the direction of the angels. Those how stories get us to our gospel today. And now we can address the why. The reason Jesus is baptized is for a very specific reason. That reason, as Jesus says, is to fulfill all righteousness. In other words, to fulfill a divine expectation. I like to think of it as Jesus is making a statement. By being baptized, Jesus is saying he is all in with God. He commits himself to God's will. And what is God's will? To restore the relationship between God and God's children. In order for that work to begin, Jesus needs to be baptized to show the world that he is serious. And while Jesus the Son is making a statement on why he is among the people, God the Father also makes a statement today. In the Gospels of Mark and Luke, when Jesus is baptized, God says, "You are my son." But here in Matthew, God says, "This is my son." That means that God is saying this out loud to John and the people. It's as if God called a press conference to announce this to the whole world. So the people get to hear firsthand that Jesus is not just another messenger. He is the Messiah. He is the Son of God, and God the Father supports his child 100%. So now we know the how, and we know the why, but there is another part of the why answer. In making his statement to God, Jesus is making a statement to all of us. And that statement is this: when you are hurting, when you are sad, when you are lonely, when you are grieving, Jesus will be with you. For Jesus came to be with you, to die for you, to love you. For when we are baptized, whether we are dunked in the water or the water is poured over us, when it happens, we become someone else. We become the beloved children of God. Beloved is a beautiful word that in the original Greek means one who is in a very special relationship with another. We are in a very special relationship with God. And to explain how Lutherans see baptism, the special relationship with God is very important to remember. Remember, we believe that this is all an action by God. We believe that because God loved us first, then we respond to God's love. When we are baptized, we are being welcomed because God has welcomed us first to the family. God died without asking for our permission. God saved us without asking for our permission. So in baptism, that is when God is saying, I've made another decision. Talk about decision theology. The decision is God chose us. Because God finds us beloved. And God has a very special relationship with all of us. Each and every one of us. And each and every one of us here, those of you who are watching online, and those who are outside of the church walls. Peter said it best in the second lesson. God shows no partiality, and that is so true. God takes all of us. For this is a relationship that God made for us. And so now God has us in his loving arms. And when God gets a hold of us, God will never let go. And that is something to give thanks to God for today. Amen.